The crowd on Main Street froze when the red Ferrari sputtered, coughed, and finally died in the middle of traffic. Victoria Hale, the glamorous billionaire in her white designer dress, stepped out, furious. Her security details circled around her as if guarding royalty. And then, in a voice dripping with sarcasm, she mocked the mechanic who happened to walk by. "If you can fix this car right here, right now, I'll marry you." The guards burst into laughter. But Ethan Cole, the broad-shouldered single dad in a grease-stained white t-shirt, didn't laugh. He just set his toolbox down, lifted the hood, and within minutes, the engine roared back to life. Victoria's laughter faded. The world around her seemed to stop. And for the first time in years, she didn't know what to say. Ethan Cole lived in a quiet little town just outside Dallas, where dusty streets stretched past old grocery stores and family diners that hadn't changed in decades. His repair shop was nothing more than a corrugated tin building with a rusty sign that read, "Cole's Repair." Yet to him, it was more than a business. It was survival. Every day, his calloused hands brought life back into engines most folks had already given up on. Sweat stained his white t-shirt, grease marked his overalls, but there was pride in the work he did. That garage wasn't just a shop, it was the last thread holding his world together. In that modest world, there was one bright light, Lily, his 10-year-old daughter with hair the color of morning sunlight. She had a habit of wearing her pink dress even while playing on the dusty concrete floor, spinning in circles as if she were a princess in a palace. Her laughter filled the shop with warmth no machine could match. Sometimes she'd pick up bolts and pretend they were jewels, giggling as she showed them to her father. To Ethan, she was more than a daughter. She was the very reason he kept fighting each day. "You're my sunshine," he whispered to her every morning. And she believed it. But behind his quiet strength lay a past scarred by loss. Ethan's wife had died after a long illness, leaving him to raise Lily alone. The hospital bills had nearly drowned him, pushing him deep into debt he could barely climb out of. Yet he refused to declare bankruptcy or walk away. Instead, he worked longer hours, sometimes sleeping on the garage floor just to make ends meet. He never complained, never asked for help, because he knew one truth. If he fell apart, Lily would have no one. That simple fact carried him through nights that otherwise would have broken him. Meanwhile, high above the town on a hill of shining glass, another world existed entirely. It was the world of Victoria Hale, a 30-year-old billionaire whose mansion looked more like a palace than a home. Walls of glass, infinity pools, manicured rose gardens, her life was an endless parade of luxury. And she wore it like armor. In her flowing white dresses, with ruby lips and sharp eyes, she carried herself as if the world bowed whenever she entered a room. People adored her beauty, envied her power, and feared the icy sharpness of her voice. To them, she was untouchable. Victoria owned companies worth billions, sat on boards of the most powerful firms in the country, and appeared regularly on the covers of glossy magazines. But none of that kept her warm at night. When the lights dimmed and the parties ended, she peeled off her flawless makeup and stared into the mirror, wondering if anyone would ever see her for who she truly was. The mansion echoed with silence so heavy it hurt. Money could buy her diamonds, but it couldn't buy trust. From childhood, her mother had warned her, "Never let anyone close, they'll only use you." And so she obeyed, building a fortress around her heart. Her reputation became her prison. People called her the Ice Queen, admiring her power while mocking her coldness. Behind closed doors, however, she sometimes wept like a child, longing for something real. A hug that didn't come with an agenda. A gaze that didn't measure her worth in dollar signs. She had everything, except love. And because she no longer believed it, she pretended not to need it. Day after day, she perfected the role of the untouchable billionaire, convincing the world she was complete. But deep down, she was simply lost. On a Friday afternoon, fate quietly set the stage. Ethan had just finished a long day at the garage and stopped at the local grocery store, carrying a paper bag of milk and cookies for Lily. He walked slowly down Main Street, tired but content, unaware that his life was about to shift forever. At the very same time, Victoria was leaving a glittering charity event downtown, sliding into her red Ferrari, a car as loud and striking as her public image. Two souls from different planets were unknowingly heading toward the same intersection. And when the Ferrari sputtered and stalled in the middle of traffic, the world seemed to pause. Victoria's anger boiled over, her bodyguards rushing around her in a panic as curious onlookers gathered. On the other side of the street, Ethan stopped, groceries in hand, watching the chaos unfold. He had no idea that in just a few moments, he would be pulled into a story far bigger than himself. A story where a broken engine would spark a connection neither of them had ever dared to dream of. The red Ferrari sputtered once, twice, then died completely in the middle of Dallas's busiest street. Horns blared as drivers swerved around it, some shouting out their windows. Victoria Hale slammed the steering wheel, her diamond bracelet catching the fading sunlight. Her bodyguards rushed forward, trying to control the chaos as pedestrians gathered with curious stares. A circle of cell phones lifted, capturing the billionaire stranded. For a woman who ruled boardrooms, this was humiliation. Victoria stepped out, her white dress glowing under the sunset, every detail of her appearance flawless except for the fury in her eyes. "Not today," she hissed, brushing back her dark curls with impatience. One bodyguard whispered nervously, "Ma'am, should we call the service team?" But Victoria wasn't patient enough for waiting. She scanned the street for someone, anyone to blame. And then her gaze landed on him. A stranger standing still amidst the commotion. Ethan Cole, in his grease-stained t-shirt and denim overalls, stood with a grocery bag in his arms. He hadn't planned to stop. He was on his way home to Lily, thinking about milk and cookies. But the scene unfolding before him caught his attention. The billionaire in distress, the Ferrari dead, the crowd watching. It was a picture of chaos he didn't want to enter. Still, he couldn't look away. "Rich folks and their toys," he muttered under his breath. Victoria, sharp-eyed and irritated, noticed his calm indifference. "Hey, you," she snapped, her voice cutting through the noise. "Yes, you, the mechanic." Ethan froze for a moment, surprised she could read him so easily. Before he could respond, she added with a mocking laugh, "If you're so smart, fix this car right here, right now." Her tone dripped with arrogance. And then, just to amuse her guards, she smirked and declared, "Do it, and I'll marry you." The bodyguards erupted in laughter, nearly doubled over at the ridiculous joke. "That's a good one, Miss Hale," one chuckled. The crowd laughed too, their phones still recording. Victoria folded her arms, chin lifted, fully expecting the man to walk away. But Ethan didn't laugh. He set down his grocery bag gently on the sidewalk, walked past the guards, and popped the hood. The laughter softened into silence. Everyone leaned in. Ethan's hands moved with certainty. Years of labor guided his fingers as he checked wires, tapped the alternator, adjusted the connections. His brow furrowed in concentration, the sound of his tools echoing in the quiet that had fallen. Victoria's smirk slowly faded as she realized he wasn't bluffing. Within minutes, the Ferrari coughed back to life, its engine purring smoothly like a beast awakened. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The impossible had just happened. Victoria's lips parted, words stuck in her throat. For once, she had no witty remark, no cold retort. The billionaire known for her dominance was speechless before a stranger. Ethan didn't even look at her. He simply wiped his hands on a rag, picked up his grocery bag, and turned to leave. "Just doing my job," he said calmly. No arrogance, no demand, just truth. The crowd watched in awe, while Victoria stood frozen. As the Ferrari's engine hummed behind her, Victoria's gaze followed the man disappearing down the street. Something about his quiet confidence unsettled her, breaking through the walls she had built around her heart. For the first time in years, she felt small, not because of power lost, but because of a truth she couldn't control. She had mocked him with a joke, but he had answered with dignity.
And deep down, she knew this was not the last time their paths would cross.
That night, Victoria lay awake in her mansion, staring at the ceiling. The image of Ethan's steady hands and calm voice refused to leave her mind. She had mocked him, yet he hadn't reacted with anger or desperation. He had simply walked away, as if her world meant nothing to him. For a woman used to men begging for her attention, that indifference cut deeper than she cared to admit, and it left her restless. Meanwhile, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, bills spread out before him, Lily asleep in the next room. He rubbed his tired eyes, thinking of the encounter with the billionaire. To him, it was nothing more than a strange incident. People like her, they live in another universe, he whispered to himself. He poured a cup of cheap coffee, sighed, and forced his focus back on numbers that never seemed to add up. Tomorrow would be another long day. But fate had other plans. A few days later, the red Ferrari rolled into Cole's repair. Victoria Hale, in another pristine white dress, stepped out of the car, looking out of place among oil-stained floors and rusty tools. The townsfolk driving by slowed down, shocked to see her there. Ethan, bent over a pickup truck, looked up and froze. "You again," he muttered, wiping his hands on a rag. "Fix it," she demanded, her tone still icy. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Say please." The room went still, Lily peeking from behind a stack of tires, curious about the elegant stranger. Victoria hesitated, her pride choking her. But under Ethan's steady gaze, her voice softened. "Please." It was a single word, but for her, it was an earthquake. She had never said it to anyone like him before. As Ethan worked, Victoria wandered the small garage, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. Lily stepped closer, her pink dress swaying as she asked, "Are you a princess?" Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the child's innocent question. For a moment, her cold mask slipped. She knelt down, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Maybe I am." Something in her chest stirred, something she hadn't felt in years. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed again and again. At the school fundraiser, Ethan flipped pancakes with Lily while Victoria handed over a giant check. At the coffee shop, he carried an old thermos while she ordered a latte in porcelain cups. At each meeting, their worlds clashed, yet somehow they kept overlapping. Slowly, curiosity turned into something deeper, though neither dared to say it aloud. But not everyone approved. At a gala, Victoria's so-called friends laughed behind their champagne glasses. "The mechanic? Really, Victoria? You can do better." She laughed along, but inside, the words stung. Later, in her car, she gripped the steering wheel, whispering, "Why do I care?" She didn't have the answer. All she knew was that Ethan's quiet strength haunted her more than any insult could. And in his world, whispers spread too. At the diner, locals teased, "So, Ethan, when's the wedding with the Ice Queen?" He only shook his head, pretending to laugh it off. But deep inside, a question gnawed at him. Could someone like her ever truly belong in his life? As the days passed, the line between their worlds blurred, pulling them closer to a breaking point neither could avoid. One evening, Ethan stepped out of his garage to lock up, only to find Victoria standing by her Ferrari. But this time, she wasn't angry or glamorous. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Everyone wants me for my money," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But when you look at me, it feels like you see me." The words hung heavy in the cool night air. Ethan's chest tightened. He had never seen her like this. He swallowed hard, then spoke gently. "Because that's all you are, just a person, and that's enough." Silence lingered between them, filled only by the hum of crickets and the soft glow of the streetlight. For a woman, always in control, standing vulnerable before a mechanic felt terrifying, yet at the same time, it felt freeing. Victoria exhaled shakily, her walls crumbling. Lily peeked out the garage door, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Daddy, who's the fancy lady?" she asked. Victoria looked down, her lips trembling into a smile she didn't expect. Ethan knelt, brushing Lily's hair.
"She's just a friend," he said softly, though his heart whispered otherwise. Victoria's gaze lingered on them, realizing she longed for this warmth more than all the riches in her mansion. But their fragile bond didn't stay secret for long. A tabloid photographer, hiding across the street, snapped a picture of Victoria leaving the shabby garage. By morning, headlines screamed across newsstands, "Billionaire heiress seen with local mechanic." Social media exploded with gossip. Victoria's phone buzzed nonstop with calls from investors, board members, and her mother. The fortress of her empire shook. Her mother's voice was cold as ice. "This is reckless, Victoria. He'll ruin you. Do you understand what's at stake?" But Victoria, clutching the phone, finally snapped back. "Maybe I don't care about what's at stake. Maybe I care about something real for once." Her mother fell silent, stunned by a daughter she could no longer control. The line went dead, but the battle had just begun. Meanwhile, Ethan sat with the newspaper spread across his kitchen table. The photo of Victoria walking away from his garage glared up at him. He knew this would destroy her reputation in the circle she lived in. That night, when she arrived at his door, he said quietly, "If this hurts your life, you don't have to stay. Don't worry about us." His words were selfless, but they cut her deeper than any insult. For the first time, Victoria faced a choice that money couldn't buy her out of. Protect her empire, her spotless image, and the world that worshipped her power. Or take the risk of loving a man who had nothing but integrity. She stood in the doorway of his small home, trembling. In her heart, she knew this decision would change everything. And as the night stretched on, Victoria realized something shocking. She wasn't afraid of losing her empire. She was afraid of losing him. That truth settled in her chest like fire. For once, the Ice Queen melted, not because of weakness, but because she had finally found something worth fighting for. The grand ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers as Dallas's elite gathered for the annual Hale Foundation Gala. Cameras flashed, reporters buzzed, and investors filled the tables in tuxedos and gowns. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hale, flawless in a glittering white gown, expected to announce her next billion-dollar project. Her mother sat in the front row, lips pressed tight. The world was watching. The pressure was suffocating. Victoria stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking against polished marble, microphone waiting before her. She opened her notes, her prepared speech lined with numbers and promises. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, she froze. All she could think of was Ethan, standing in his small garage, wiping grease off his hands, looking at her like she was simply human. Her chest tightened. The words on the page no longer mattered. Her mother hissed from the front row, "Choose wisely." The audience leaned forward, expecting power and precision. Victoria's voice trembled at first, but she pushed through. "Tonight, I was meant to talk about profits and progress, but what I've learned is that all the money in the world cannot buy love or family or honesty." The crowd gasped, whispers rippling like a wave. Cameras clicked faster. Something unprecedented was happening. "I found someone," she continued, her eyes glistening under the lights. "He doesn't wear a suit, he doesn't live in a mansion, but he is the richest man I have ever known." The ballroom erupted in shock. Her mother's face turned pale with fury, while investors exchanged worried looks. Victoria held her ground, heart racing. This wasn't about business anymore. It was about truth. At home, Ethan sat on his worn-out couch, Lily curled beside him, the TV casting a glow across their faces. He nearly dropped his coffee when he heard his name echo from the stage. "His name is Ethan Cole," Victoria declared boldly, "and he fixed more than my engine. He fixed my heart." Ethan's jaw tightened, emotions swirling, as Lily whispered with wide eyes, "Daddy, she's talking about you."
Reporters shouted questions, flashes blinded the stage, chaos erupted. But Victoria didn't stay to answer. She walked off, her heels striking like thunder, determination etched in her face. Her mother called after her, security scrambled, but nothing could stop her. She wasn't going back to her empire, not yet. She was going to him. She was going home. Outside Ethan's garage, headlights cut through the darkness. The Ferrari screeched to a stop, and Victoria stepped out, her gown glittering under the street lamp. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she saw him standing there, stunned. "I wasn't joking, Ethan," she cried, her voice breaking. "Will you marry me?" The night air held its breath, waiting. Ethan's heart pounded. Lily peeked from behind his leg, her pink dress glowing faintly in the lamplight. The mechanic who had spent years surviving stood face to face with the billionaire who had everything but love. For a moment, the world disappeared. It was just them, three souls on a quiet street, standing at the edge of forever.
Ethan stared at her, torn between disbelief and fear. "Victoria, this is crazy," he whispered, shaking his head. But she stepped closer, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Maybe it is, but life is short, and I don't want to waste another second without you." Her voice cracked, raw and real. For once, the Ice Queen was gone. Before him stood just a woman in love. Lily tugged at Ethan's hand, her voice small but hopeful. "Say yes, Daddy." Ethan looked down at her, then back at Victoria's trembling hands. His chest tightened as memories of lonely nights flooded his mind. Could this really be happening? Could love cross such impossible worlds? Slowly, his lips curved into the faintest smile. "Yes," he whispered. Victoria's tears turned into laughter, shaky but filled with joy. She threw her arms around both Ethan and Lily, holding them tight as if afraid they might disappear. For the first time, her embrace wasn't for show. It was for love. The garage, once a place of struggle, became a sanctuary of hope. The hum of the city faded into silence. All that mattered was here, now. The tabloids went wild in the days that followed. Some mocked her, calling it reckless. Others praised her courage, hailing it as a fairy tale in real life. But Victoria didn't care. She no longer lived for headlines. She lived for the mornings when Ethan kissed her forehead before work, and Lily climbed into her lap at breakfast, calling her Mom. The noise of the world couldn't reach them anymore. Ethan's small garage, once forgotten, became the most famous repair shop in Texas. People didn't come just because of Victoria's name. They came because they trusted the man who fixed cars with integrity. But despite the crowds, Ethan remained the same, sleeves rolled up, grease on his hands, humming softly as he worked. And every so often, Victoria stopped by with lunch, her gown traded for jeans, her smile brighter than any diamond. Weeks later, the wedding was held in the small-town church. No paparazzi were allowed inside. Only friends, neighbors, and Lily as the flower girl. Ethan stood at the altar in a simple suit, his hands trembling as Victoria walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown. When their eyes met, the world faded. There was no billionaire, no mechanic, only two souls finding each other at last. As they exchanged vows, Ethan whispered, "You're not here because I fixed your car." Victoria smiled through tears, her voice steady. "No, I'm here because you fixed me." Their kiss sealed more than a marriage. It sealed a promise of healing, of second chances, of love that had defied all odds. The church bells rang, echoing across the town, carrying hope on every note. That night, as the newlyweds danced in the glow of string lights outside the garage, neighbors clapped and cheered. Lily twirled in her pink dress, laughing as Ethan lifted her high into the air. Victoria watched, her heart finally at peace. She had traded boardrooms for backyard laughter, fortune for family. And in that moment, she knew she hadn't lost a thing. She had gained everything. The story of Ethan Cole and Victoria Hale spread far beyond their small town. It wasn't just the tale of a billionaire falling for a mechanic. It was a reminder that love could bloom in the most unlikely places.
Strangers who read about them whispered to themselves, "If they can find each other, maybe I can too." Their journey touched hearts everywhere because it spoke a truth no one could deny. We are all searching for something real. Victoria learned what her wealth had hidden from her for so long, that vulnerability was not weakness but strength. For the first time, she wasn't admired for her fortune, her clothes, or her beauty. She was loved for her laughter, her kindness, and even her flaws. And in Ethan's eyes, she wasn't the Ice Queen. She was simply Victoria, the woman he chose every day. That was worth more than billions. Ethan, too, discovered something new. He had always believed his life was too small, too ordinary, to ever hold something extraordinary. Yet love had walked straight into his modest garage and turned his world upside down. He didn't need riches or fame. He had a family, and in that family, he was the wealthiest man alive. Sometimes the greatest fortune is found in the simplest joys. And little Lily, who once played with bolts as if they were jewels, learned that fairy tales weren't just stories in books. They could be real. She saw her father smile again, saw a woman who treated her like a daughter, and felt her world fill with warmth she had once lost. In her heart, she knew she was part of something magical. For Lily, love was no longer just a dream. It was home. Together, they built a life that blended two worlds. The grand mansion no longer felt cold because laughter echoed through its halls. The garage no longer felt lonely because Victoria often brought coffee and sat beside Ethan while he worked. Their differences didn't divide them, they completed them. And slowly, the town realized this was not just a romance, it was a lesson. Because love in its purest form is not about wealth or status. It is about choosing someone day after day for who they truly are. Ethan chose Victoria not for her billions, but for the woman she became. And Victoria chose Ethan not for his strength alone, but for the heart that refused to give up. Their love was proof that sometimes the most broken things, like a stalled engine, can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. At gatherings, neighbors often teased Ethan, "So, how does it feel to marry a billionaire?" He would grin, shaking his head, and reply, "I just fixed her engine. She did the rest." Victoria would laugh, leaning into his shoulder, knowing deep down that it was the simplest truth. They hadn't just repaired a car, they had repaired each other. And in that, they had won. So if you ever feel like your life is too ordinary or your dreams too far away, remember this story. Love doesn't check your bank account or your last name. It only asks for honesty, kindness, and courage. Ethan and Victoria proved that walls can fall, wounds can heal, and second chances are real. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more inspiring tales like this. Because sometimes the most beautiful love begins with a broken engine and a brave heart.